"I can read," said the maid's son. In front of everyone, the millionaire mocked, certain that the boy would be humiliated, but no one imagined that those words would change the fate of the entire room. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now to help us bring you more moving stories that impact lives. In Edmund Wycliffe's imposing mansion, a heavy silence fell over the main hall. The marble walls reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers, creating a grand yet cold atmosphere. This was no ordinary party. The guests were high society figures, intellectuals, businessmen, and collectors who gathered to witness the millionaire's peculiar ostentation. In the center, an oak table displayed not jewelry nor golden cups, but extremely rare books, some with worn leather covers, others adorned with symbols that seemed to come from another era. Edmund raised his voice proudly, declaring that none of those present would ever dare understand what was written on the pages before them. Standing near the door, Amara Villalobos held a tray of glasses tightly, her shoulders tense with the weight not only of her work, but also of the constant feeling of invisibility. Her eyes, discreet, wandered between the guests and the books on display, always careful not to be overly noticed. Beside her, half hidden behind the blue skirt of her uniform, was her son, Jonas Villalobos. The boy, just 12 years old, observed every detail as if hypnotized. The strange symbols in the books called to him, awakening something in him that not even his mother fully understood. It was at that moment that Edmund, with a mocking smile, pointed to the open volume on his desk, a red-covered book filled with unfamiliar characters. "This is my greatest treasure," he declared triumphantly. "No one here would be able to read a single word of these pages, not even the most renowned professors in the city." Laughter echoed through the hall, reinforcing his arrogance. But Jonas, unable to contain his uneasiness, whispered, "I can read it, sir." The hall fell into absolute silence, and all eyes turned to the boy. Edmund narrowed his eyes in puzzlement, a slow, cruel smile forming on his face. But what would happen after that bold comment from the maid's son would forever change the night Edmund tried to prove his superiority. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath at Jonas's words. Edmund Wycliffe slowly turned his face toward the boy, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. First came an almost awkward silence, then a low chuckle that quickly grew until it echoed off the marble walls. The millionaire leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, and mocked, "You boy? The maid's son? Do you really think you can decipher something that even doctors and experts couldn't? Don't make me laugh." Laughter spread among some guests, who saw this as just another cruel spectacle put on by their host. Amara, shocked, felt her heart tighten and tugged at Jonas's arm, trying to silence him, but the boy kept his eyes fixed on the book as if nothing around him mattered. Edmund's gaze, heavy with arrogance, weighed down on them, transforming the moment into a public tribunal of humiliation. Still, something about the boy's firm expression caused some of the people present to start looking at each other curiously, as if a strange expectation had just been born in the air. Edmund, always eager for applause and control, realized he had found the perfect opportunity to reinforce his image of superiority before everyone. With a brusque gesture, he thrust the open book toward Jonas and said sarcastically, "Well, little sage, here's your chance. Read it. Show us all the talent you think you have. I guarantee it will be nothing more than a farce, and your boldness will serve as entertainment for this evening." The words cut through the air like sharp blades, and many of the guests laughed immediately, expecting the boy's imminent failure. Amara, her hands trembling, tried again to restrain her son, whispering to him not to get involved in something that could further ruin his dignity. But Jonas, firm, raised his eyes, stared at the millionaire, and then returned to the book with unexpected determination. His calm but resolute voice cut through the silence as he said, "If that's what you wish, sir, I will read it." At that moment, A chill ran down the spines of everyone in the hall, as if they sensed that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. But what Jonas was about to reveal when he opened his mouth would not only silence Edmund's laughter, but would also change the course of that night forever. Jonas took a deep breath, his small hands resting on the heavy oak table, where the book lay open like a riddle waiting to be solved. The strange letters, drawn in crooked lines and unusual symbols, seemed alive under the golden light of the chandeliers. The attentive eyes of the guests fixed on the boy, many already ready to laugh, others curious to see how far his childish boldness could go. Amara, desperate, could feel her heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in her ears. She knew any mistake could turn that moment into irreparable humiliation. Edmund, on the other hand, leaned back in his leather armchair with a disdainful smile, crossing his arms as if awaiting a comedic performance. The tension became almost palpable, the silence was thick, and even the crystal glasses trembled in the guests' hands. Jonas, however, didn't look away. The symbols before him weren't confusion, but an invitation, something familiar that awakened a long-held memory. When he opened his mouth to speak the first word, the entire room seemed to lean forward, as if everyone was trying to hear the impossible happen. The boy's voice was soft at first, almost timid, but then gained firmness and clarity, as if each syllable carried weight and certainty. He read an entire sentence, revealing that those pages told stories of an ancient people, describing victories and defeats, wisdom hidden in metaphors no one there dared decipher. The sound of the words seemed magical, flowing naturally, without effort or hesitation, and immediately silenced the laughter that was about to burst from some of the guests. The hall, so accustomed to being a scene of boasting and ostentation, was now the stage for a historic moment, where the improbable was before everyone. The maid's son deciphering secrets that even renowned scholars had failed to grasp. Edmund, listening, felt the smile drain from his face like ink washed away by rain, his eyes widening slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. Amara, unable to hold back her tears, put her hand to her mouth, shocked not only by her son's courage, but by a talent she herself hadn't even known in its full extent. The stunned guests began to look at one another, speechless, as if an uncomfortable truth had just been laid bare before them. Jonas turned the page slowly, his fingers gliding carefully over the aged paper, as if respecting a sacred reliquary. His reading progressed, and with each translated sentence, he revealed passages about kings, leaders, and visions of a future shaped by wisdom. The contrast was stark. A boy in simple clothes, with worn sneakers and bright eyes, fluently reading something no one there had ever dared to attempt. With each new sentence, the atmosphere changed. Glasses stopped clinking, side conversations disappeared, and each guest's breath seemed held. Edmund, sweating beneath his expensive suit, forced a short laugh, but was silenced by the incredulous looks of some scholars present who already recognized the legitimacy of what they were hearing. Jonas, focused, didn't seek applause, didn't seek attention. He simply read, naturally, as if this gift had always been part of who he was. And by looking up for a moment and looking directly at Edmund, he made the millionaire feel, for the first time that night, that he might no longer be in control of his own party. Jonas's words rippled through the hall like invisible waves, each translated phrase drawing incredulous glances from all sides, and even the most skeptical no longer dared to whisper. The boy seemed to illuminate those pages like a beacon in the darkness, his clear voice echoing meanings that until then had been locked in the silence of time. Some guests leaned forward, fascinated by the cadence of the words that sounded almost like music, while others hid their discomfort at realizing that a poor boy, the son of a maid, was presenting them with a spectacle greater than any fortune could buy. Amara, with tears in her eyes, could hardly believe that the boy she had read so often hidden in the dim light of the lamp was now standing before powerful men and women, dominating the center of a room not made for him. Edmund, on the other hand, changed with every second. His previously relaxed and mocking expression gave way to a tense one, his eyes blinking rapidly, his fingers drumming on the table, as if each word read were a threat to his authority. The millionaire, who had always treated his books as inaccessible trophies, began to feel the weight of seeing them deciphered by someone he considered unworthy even to touch the polished floor of his mansion. The seconds dragged by, and the collective breath of the room seemed to have condensed into a single, suspended breath, waiting for the next sound to emerge from Jonas's mouth. The boy, oblivious to the tension, continued confidently, as if he were not in the midst of a social trial, but rather in his own room, reading a story to himself. Each word revealed more. Passages that spoke of ancient secrets, of alliances and betrayals of forgotten peoples, phrases that seemed to have been buried, never to resurface. Some guests, connoisseurs of languages and cultures, widened their eyes as they realized that the boy not only read, but understood, interpreted, and brought to life what was before him. One scholar murmured in shock, "This is unbelievable." But Edmund could no longer bear the odd silence that grew around Jonas. With a sudden movement, he slammed his hand on the table, interrupting the flow of the reading, and the fake laughter escaped his lips like a desperate scream. "This is a cheap trick," he shouted, his voice breaking the spell that hung in the air. Still, the looks in the audience showed that no one was convinced by his accusation, and this realization gnawed at him. Amara instinctively recoiled as Edmund rose from his chair, his face flushed and the veins in his neck bulging. But Jonas didn't take a single step back. On the contrary, he kept his hand on the book, as if protecting a valuable secret. The millionaire, trying to regain his lost authority, advanced toward the boy and barked, "Did you memorize that somewhere, brat? Or did someone whisper those words to you to embarrass me here in my own home?" The accusation hung heavy in the air, but no one applauded, no one laughed, no one supported him. Only an uncomfortable silence dominated the room. Jonas looked up and, with an almost insolent calm, replied, "No, sir. I just know how to read." The impact of the sentence was like a bolt of lightning cutting through the room, and some guests clapped their hands over their mouths, while others shook their heads in astonishment. It was at that moment that a deep voice, coming from the back of the room, broke the silence. It belonged to a man who until then had remained discreet, observing every detail with an analytical gaze. The murmur that spread was immediate, as everyone recognized that imposing figure. Professor Leonard Gray, one of the greatest linguists in the country, was there to witness the impossible. The hall, which until then had vibrated with restrained silence, immediately turned to the figure of Leonard Gray, whose presence until that moment had seemed inconsequential, almost invisible among the many important guests. Tall, with neatly combed gray hair and thin-rimmed glasses that reflected the light from the chandeliers, he had an aura of seriousness that silenced any conversation around him. Leonard was no ordinary guest. He was a leading authority on linguistics and ancient history, with articles published at renowned universities and books translated into several languages. His name carried weight, and even Edmund knew that contradicting him risked public disgrace. As Leonard took a few steps forward, leaning lightly on his dark wooden cane, all eyes fixed on him expectantly. His deep, calm, yet firm voice pierced the room. "This boy isn't making it up. What he just read is authentic. I've tried to translate this text myself and have never been able to proceed without hesitation." The murmur that spread was immediate, filling the hall with astonishment and discomfort. Edmund, upon hearing those words, felt the ground slip away from him for a moment. The sarcastic smile he was still trying to maintain wavered like a flame about to go out. He shook his head, quickly denying it, like someone refusing to accept an inconvenient truth. "It can't be. That's impossible," he muttered through clenched teeth, but his uncertain tone already betrayed the fragility of his position. Leonard, however, gave him no room to regain control. He approached the table, asked Jonas to continue reading, and attentively observed every sentence, every word. With each confirmation that the boy was right, Edmund lost more control of the moment. The guests, once complicit in the cruel laughter, now leaned in to listen to Jonas with respect, as if the boy had become the centerpiece of the evening. Amara, motionless, felt her legs tremble, but her chest swelled with a restrained pride, something she never thought she would experience before such a powerful audience. The image of her son, small before such influential men, was at once frightening and glorious, as if a new story were being written at that moment. Jonas, undeterred, returned his gaze to the pages and resumed reading. The words flowed again, clearly and naturally, and Leonard made brief mental notes, nodding his head in approval. The boy seemed to have immersed himself in another universe, transporting everyone with him into the enigma the pages held. Edmund, however, could no longer bear the burden of being relegated to the background in his own mansion. He stepped forward, abruptly interrupting the collective concentration, and exclaimed in an exalted tone, "Enough! I will not allow my home to be the stage for a farce." His shout echoed through the hall, but instead of echoing respect, it provoked only discomfort and looks of disapproval. Leonard then slowly turned to him, with a look that seemed to cut through his arrogance like a sharp blade, and said calmly, "If it's a farce, Edmund, prove it. Show us yourself that this boy is wrong." The weight of the challenge fell on the millionaire, and everyone waited in silence, anxious to see how he would react in the face of unquestionable authority. Edmund took a deep breath, trying to hide the discomfort that was beginning to show in every feature of his face. He walked slowly to the table, his leather shoes echoing on the marble floor like the pounding of a hammer, each step tense. The silence was absolute, and everyone followed his every move as if they were watching a public trial. The millionaire leaned over the book, forcing a tense smile, and quickly scanned the lines Jonas had just read. The strange, intricate symbols seemed to dance before his eyes, transforming into indecipherable squiggles. But Edmund, too proud to back down, cleared his throat loudly and tried to articulate a word. The sound came out garbled, mixed with a hesitation that made some of the guests frown. He persisted, but only stumbled over disjointed sounds that bore no resemblance to the boy's steady cadence. His cheeks flushed, sweat ran down his forehead, and in a few seconds Edmund, who always controlled every detail of the situation, was exposed, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of the critical looks that spread across the room. The guests, who had previously laughed at Jonas, now exchanged looks of astonishment and quiet murmurs at the uncomfortable scene. Edmund's pride, so solid until that moment, crumbled like broken glass before the audience. Leonard Gray stood with his arms crossed, watching silently, letting the millionaire's own incapacity become his condemnation. Jonas, standing beside the table, said nothing, but his eyes shone with a mixture of serenity and firmness, without a hint of arrogance, only conviction. Amara, for her part, felt her heart beat faster, fearing Edmund's reaction, but at the same time experiencing a growing pride at seeing her son resist without lowering his head. The millionaire tried again, but his voice faltered, and the laugh he intended to conceal sounded forced, drawing even more disapproving looks from the guests. It was as if the castle of power and respect he had built for years was beginning to crumble in the face of a single night and a single boy who dared to say, "I can read." Overcome with fury and shame, Edmund shoved the book away, sending pages flying and the silence turning to shock. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted, his voice reverberating against the high walls. but without the force of authority that usually dominated any room. His face was flushed, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear, and his rapid breathing betrayed the extent to which he had lost control. Leonard stepped forward, his calm presence contrasting with Edmund's outburst, and said firmly, "Knowledge cannot be silenced, Edmund. You can shout all you want, but the truth has already been revealed." The entire hall remained still, as if waiting for the next spark that could escalate the tension into something even greater. Jonas, serene, picked up one of the pages that had fluttered to the floor, looked at the symbols, and began reading them aloud again, his voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. And in that instant, everyone realized that the battle was not just in the book, but in the pride of a man about to crumble in front of everyone. Jonas held the fallen leaf with steady hands, as if that simple page held the key to something far greater than anyone there could imagine. His eyes ran over the lines covered in unusual symbols, and the room fell silent again. He began to read aloud, each word emerging with startling clarity, as if the phrases had been etched in his memory forever. The guests leaned forward, attentive, absorbing every sound. What had previously seemed merely an exotic book began to transform into a revelation. Jonas described ancient battles, secret agreements, and, in particular, a passage that spoke of a hidden treasure, protected for generations, whose whereabouts could only be found by those who could understand the words. The boy's tone of voice lent weight to the narrative, as if the book itself came to life through him. Edmund, in shock, tried to hide his nervousness, but his eyes betrayed the fear that the value of his collection was about to slip beyond his control. The impact of the reading was so strong that some guests began to murmur among themselves, unable to contain their amazement. Leonard Gray moved even closer to the table, his eyes fixed on Jonas, confirming with slight nods that what the boy was saying made sense. "It's impossible. He couldn't have made this up," whispered one of the businessmen present, while another exclaimed, "This book is worth more than we imagined." Amara, clutching the tray to her chest, could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Her son, so often invisible, was now the absolute center of a room full of powerful figures. Jonas, however, seemed oblivious to the enormity of the moment, focused solely on giving voice to the words that would otherwise remain buried in the silence of time. With each new sentence, the room filled with anticipation, as if everyone were being led to a revelation that would change not only their view of the book, but of the boy himself. Edmund tried to interrupt, but was restrained by the firm gazes of the guests, who no longer saw him as the authority of the evening. The reading progressed, and the words took on increasingly intriguing contours, describing symbols hidden within the pages that indicated places and secret markings that could point to riches lost centuries ago. Jonas deciphered passages with impressive calm, explaining hidden meanings that even Leonard, a recognized expert, acknowledged with admiration. "He's not just reading, he understands," the professor said in a low voice, but audible enough to reach Edmund's ears. The millionaire, now sweating coldly, stared at the boy with a mixture of fear and anger, as if with each word he read, he was losing not only control of the situation, but also something he considered exclusively his. The fascinated guests no longer remembered their initial laughter. They were mesmerized by the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. And when Jonas looked up and announced that there was something even deeper written between the lines, a revelation no one had ever perceived, the entire hall held its breath, feeling as if they were faced with a secret capable of turning everything upside down. Jonas slid his fingers over the pages, as if beyond the visible words he could sense something engraved in every ancient line, in every curve of the symbols. His eyes sparkled when he found signs that went unnoticed by others, small marks between the lines, almost invisible, as if they were a secret code embedded in the handwriting itself. It's not just a historical text, the boy said in a calm but firm voice. "It's a coded message, left for those who could read beyond the words." The hall shook with murmurs, and many approached the table, trying to see what he was indicating. Leonard Gray adjusted his glasses, leaning over the book, and nodded slightly. "He's right. There are symbols hidden in the line spacing, something I've never noticed before." The professor's comment fell like a thunderclap over the guests, who looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. Edmund, feeling cornered, advanced towards the table, but his nervous gaze betrayed more than curiosity. It betrayed fear, as if he recognized that there was a secret there that he never wanted to come to light. Amara's breath caught in her throat, her hands clutching the tray to her chest, as if seeking protection from something invisible. Watching her son unravel mysteries that powerful men had never even noticed was a mixture of pride and dread. The boy, serene, went on to explain that these hidden symbols formed instructions pointing to a specific location, a kind of map disguised within the text itself. "It's like a key to something they wanted to protect," Jonas said, making the room lean in once more toward his words. The fascinated guests felt like they were witnessing something historic, as if an archaeological discovery were unfolding before their eyes. Leonard, his face alight with excitement, murmured, "This could change our understanding of this entire civilization." With each new revelation, Edmund trembled more, sweat trickling down the back of his neck, his initial arrogance giving way to silent desperation. He tried to interrupt, but no one else listened. The boy who had been the butt of jokes was now the only one who had everyone's attention and respect. Jonas took a deep breath and, staring intently at the lines, began to decipher the hidden instructions. His voice, steady and measured, described symbols that indicated directions, mentioned rivers, mountains, and even a specific object to be found. The guests were mesmerized, his every word a direct blow to Edmund's pride. The millionaire, unable to bear it any longer, slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Enough! This book is mine. None of this matters. You're being deceived." But his voice no longer held the same authority. It sounded like the desperate cry of someone who was losing everything. Leonard then raised his hand for silence and looked directly at Jonas. "Continue," he said firmly. The boy nodded and continued. "These instructions, they lead to something that is still hidden, something no one has ever found." The entire room leaned forward, attentive, and Edmund's eyes widened in panic, for he knew exactly what the boy was about to talk about. Jonas continued reading the hidden instructions, his voice filling the hall with unexpected force, as if those words carried the weight of forgotten centuries. He described symbols that spoke of a secret passage, of something buried not far away, guarded as if it were a legacy. "It is written here that the guardian of this message should hide the object where light never reaches, beneath the cold earth, protected by layers of stone," Jonas said, pointing to the nearly invisible signs in the book. The guests looked at each other, some open-mouthed, others leaning even closer to try to see what he was reading. Leonard Gray, his eyes fixed on the page, confirmed again, "This is authentic. It is not just an interpretation, it is a faithful translation." The professor was amazed, but Edmund trembled with anger and fear. He knew those words were not new to him, and that was why his heart was racing. Years ago, when he had bought that book, a note on a piece of paper forgotten between the pages had already revealed part of that secret to him, but he had never had the courage to share it. Now, in front of everyone, a boy was about to expose what he had hidden for so long. Amara watched the millionaire's every reaction carefully, her instinct telling her there was something wrong with the way Edmund was regarding her son. It wasn't just contempt or arrogance. There was fear in the man's eyes, a fear that seemed to grow with each word Jonas read. The boy, oblivious to the swirling emotions around him, delved deeper and deeper into his reading, deciphering instructions that spoke of hidden vaults, valuable relics, and a symbol of power capable of transforming the fate of whoever possessed it. The guests were mesmerized, unable to look away, as if witnessing an impossible spectacle. Leonard, with a gleam in his eye, murmured, "If this is true, we're facing the discovery of the century." Edmund, unable to control himself, let out a forced laugh, but his voice cracked as he said, "All a boy's invention. It's nothing but nonsense." However, no one believed his words anymore. The air in the room had changed, and everyone now saw in him only the shadow of a cornered man. Jonas closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued, revealing the most enigmatic part of the text. It says here that the object is hidden in a place marked with the names of those who fell, and that only someone pure of intentions would be able to find it. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if everyone in the room had stopped breathing. Leonard placed his hand on his chin, thoughtfully pondering the words, while some guests murmured theories about cemeteries, memorials, or secret chambers. Amara clutched the tray even tighter to her chest, fearing that this mystery was more than they could bear. Edmund, for his part, was livid, his eyes wide, as if struck by a revelation he didn't want to hear. His entire body trembled, betraying that he knew very well where this place of the fallen might be. And when Jonas looked up, looking the millionaire directly in the eye, a ripple of tension rippled through the room, making it clear that the boy's next sentence might unearth a secret Edmund had spent his life trying to hide. The entire room seemed frozen as Jonas lifted his head and let his eyes stare directly at Edmund, fearlessly, as if the boy were about to reveal something the millionaire himself had feared for years. In a firm voice, Jonas read the last lines he had deciphered. "The place is marked with the names of the fallen, and he who finds it must prove not only intelligence but purity of heart." The words echoed through the room, sounding almost like a sentence. The guests grew restless, some murmuring theories about war memorials, others about ancient crypts hidden beneath the city. Edmund, for his part, was pale, his trembling hands gripping the edge of the table as if he might collapse at any moment. Leonard, watching closely, noticed the millionaire's unusual reaction and narrowed his eyes, suspicious that Edmund knew more than he was letting on. Amara, motionless, felt every muscle in her body tense, as if sensing that this moment was about to expose something much greater than anyone imagined. The weight of the revelation seemed to hang over everyone, but especially over Edmund, who was breathing heavily, unable to control his nervousness. Jonas turned back to the book, as if the open page were burning in his hands with the force of dormant secrets. He read slowly, deciphering symbols that spoke of a specific location. The land of the Wycliffes, where the first blood was shed, holds what none dared claim. The shock was immediate. The guests let out muffled gasps as Edmund's family name spread through the air like a thunderclap no one expected to hear. Edmund staggered back a step, his face filled with terror disguised as anger, trying to force a smile, but failing miserably. This means nothing," he shouted, but his voice sounded frail, devoid of its former imposingness. Leonard stepped forward, looking at him seriously. "It does, Edmund. This book is linked to your own lineage, and you know it." The silence that followed was heavy, as if everyone was on the verge of discovering a secret buried not only beneath the earth, but also in the history of the Wycliffe family. Amara couldn't contain the tightness in her chest as she watched Edmund's gaze desperately flee from Jonas's, as if afraid the boy might reveal more than he was prepared to bear. The guests, increasingly intrigued, approached, forming a circle around the table, thirsting for answers. Jonas, maintaining impressive calm, continued reading and translated another line hidden in the text. The guardian sealed the entrance with the name of the fallen brother, so that only the righteous could recognize it. The sentence fell like a bombshell in the room, and suddenly all eyes turned to Edmund, who was now breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his forehead and his entire body betraying the fragility of his mask. Leonard, in a low, almost accusatory voice, asked, "Edmund, is there any memorial in your family that matches that description?" The millionaire remained silent, his lips trembling, unable to articulate a convincing answer. And it was at that moment that the guests realized, with a collective shudder, that the key to this enigma was directly linked to the Wycliffe's dark past, a past that Edmund had tried to erase at any cost. A heavy silence fell over the hall, and everyone anxiously awaited Edmund's reaction. His eyes, once haughty and full of contempt, now flickered from side to side, searching for an escape, but finding no refuge in any of the surrounding faces. Jonas, his hands firmly on the book, returned to reading the hidden symbols, his calm voice seeming to cut the air like sharp blades. The mark was left upon the name of Elias Wycliffe, the fallen brother, so that the lineage would never forget the price paid. At the mention of that name, a murmur spread among the guests, many of them familiar with the family's genealogy and past deeds. Leonard's eyes widened, immediately recognizing the historical reference. Elias Wycliffe. The professor repeated quietly, "Records indicate that he died under mysterious circumstances during the expansion of the family's lands, and his name has been little mentioned since." The impact was overwhelming. Jonas wasn't just reading. He was revealing secrets that even scholars had only heard in fragments. Edmund, livid, reached for his jacket pocket, as if seeking support, but the sweat running down his face betrayed that he was about to lose control in front of everyone. The guests, fascinated and frightened, now saw Edmund no longer as the imposing host, but as the heir to a tarnished legacy. Some murmured about ancient rumors, hushed stories, and violent disputes over the lands that had sustained the Wycliffe fortune. Leonard, in a firm tone, turned to Edmund. "You knew this all along, didn't you? That's why you kept this book as a trophy and wouldn't let anyone near it." The accusation echoed through the hall, and Edmund tried to respond, but his voice broke mid-sentence. I never, it doesn't matter." He stammered, but no one believed him anymore. Amara, watching closely, felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride in her son who defied everyone's logic, and fear that this knowledge would awaken something too dangerous. Jonas, impassive, continued reading, as if guided by a force greater than himself, revealing instructions about where exactly Elijah's name had been carved. In cold stone, at the foot of the field where blood fell, lies the entrance that must never be desecrated. With each sentence, Edmund shrank further, until he seemed smaller than everyone around him. Leonard moved even closer to the table, leaning over Jonas to see the words with his own eyes, and solemnly confirmed, "It's true. This book is a guide, a map hidden in history, and it's directly linked to your family, Edmund." The millionaire, pressured, slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "Enough! You don't understand anything. These writings are legends, nothing more." But the desperation in his voice betrayed otherwise, and the effect was devastating. The guests no longer regarded him with admiration, but with distrust and even contempt. Jonas closed the book slowly, as if guarding a secret only to reveal it at the right moment, and looked directly at Edmund. "You can deny it all you want, but the truth is here. And if the place described still exists, we all know that only someone willing to seek the truth can find it." The hall fell into an almost unbearable silence, until Leonard, his voice deep and expectant, took the next step. "So, Edmund, what exactly are you hiding about the name Elias Wycliffe?" The millionaire froze, unable to answer, and in that instant everyone realized that the secret kept for generations was about to be unearthed in front of powerful witnesses. The hall seemed smaller, suffocating, as if the marble walls were closing in on Edmund Wycliffe, imprisoning him in front of everyone. He wiped the sweat from his brow with an expensive handkerchief, but his hands trembled so much that the scene became pathetic to the guests. Leonard Gray stood firm, his gaze fixed on the millionaire, as if dismantling piece by piece the mask of a powerful man. Jonas, still standing before the book, waited in silence, but his presence seemed greater than any other in the room. Edmund tried to speak, his voice breaking. All this is worthless stories, ancient inventions to frighten children. But no one believed him. Every word the boy read sounded so authentic, so clear, that any attempt to deny it seemed only to reinforce his guilt. The guests whispered, some mentally registering the historical shame they were witnessing, others simply shocked by the unexpected turn of the evening. Amara, with tears held back, watched her son and felt that Jonas was revealing something that would forever change not only their lives, but the fate of everyone in that room. Jonas, sensing Edmund's resistance, opened the book again and pointed to a passage that until then had seemed illegible to anyone else. Here it is written that the guardian sealed the place with additional symbols, engraved in stone, to confuse those who sought unearned riches. Only those who knew how to read between the lines could find it. The explanation fell like a final sentence, and Leonard confirmed enthusiastically, "This is brilliant. It's a type of ancient cryptography, a way of hiding information within the writing itself." The hall erupted in murmurs, guests commenting on the genius of the text and the boy's clarity in deciphering it. Edmund, however, staggered to the table and pushed the book away forcefully, as if he could erase everything that had been revealed. "You are blind. This boy doesn't know what he's saying." His voice sounded more like a desperate cry than a statement of authority. Jonas, unmoved, looked directly at him and said calmly, "If I don't know, then why do you fear my words so much?" The sentence fell like a blow, and a thick silence spread throughout the hall, leaving Edmund without a response. Humiliation was inevitable. The guests looked at Edmund no longer with respect, but with distrust and contempt. Leonard, moving even closer, said in a firm voice, "You can deny it, Edmund, but you can't hide it forever. If this place you described still exists, it will be discovered. And now we all know the secret is tied to your family." Edmund took a step back, his breathing quickening, his entire body betraying the defeat he was trying to hide. Amara clenched her hands, torn between fear of the consequences and pride in her son's courage. Jonas closed the book with a calm movement, but the dry sound of the pages clanging echoed through the hall like a gavel sealing a judgment. "It is not I who should fear this secret, sir," he said, staring intently at Edmund, "but he who has hidden it all his life." The impact of the sentence sent shivers down everyone's spine, and then one of the guests, unable to contain his curiosity, asked aloud, "If the book speaks of the Wycliffe lineage, what exactly is buried in the name of Elias?" Edmund's terrified look answered before he could open his mouth. Jonas took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment before returning to the book, as if needing to organize the avalanche of revelations about to spill from his mouth. When he opened them again, his expression was firm, and his voice rang out clearly in the absolute silence. "It is written that what was buried is not just gold or silver, but something that holds the weight of truth." The Guardian wrote, "What was hidden does not enrich pockets, but condemns consciences." The hall reacted immediately, some guests murmuring in alarm, others leaning forward in anticipation. Leonard Gray, breathing heavily with fascination, nodded slowly and murmured, "That explains it. It wasn't just a map of wealth. It was a confession." With each sentence Jonas uttered, the tension grew, as if layers of a rotten past were being peeled away before everyone's eyes. Amara barely breathed, clutching her hands to her chest, knowing her son was touching something no one there had ever dared imagine. Edmund, pale and trembling, seemed smaller than ever, as if swallowed by a secret that insisted on surfacing. The boy flipped through another page and pointed to a passage marked by symbols only he seemed to understand. It says here that Elias Wycliffe did not fall by accident, but was brought down by bloodlust, betrayed in his own house. The impact was devastating. A murmur erupted among the guests, shocked by the revelation. Leonard, wide-eyed, raised his voice for all to hear. This is history being rewritten before our eyes. If the book speaks the truth, the Wycliffe fortune was born of fratricidal betrayal. Edmund staggered, trying to maintain his balance, but his eyes darted away from any contact. "Lies," he shouted, but his voice sounded so frail it sounded like the groan of a defeated man. Jonas continued mercilessly, as if he were merely the mouthpiece of these pages. Elijah was buried in secret, and the spot marked with his name, so that future generations would bear the guilt in silence. The room was filled with awe, and even the most skeptical could no longer doubt. Amara felt tears well up, not just for her son, but for the magnitude of what he was revealing. The weight of the words hung in the air like a curse. Edmund tried to deny it, but every gesture, every sweat on his brow, every tremor in his hands confirmed otherwise. The guests, once admirers, now regarded him as an accomplice to a filthy inheritance, a man who sustained his empire on bones and silence. Leonard, approaching the table, stared at Edmund and said with the gravity of a judge, "You knew that, didn't you? You kept this book not out of pride, but out of fear." The millionaire stammered, but no complete words came from his lips. Jonas then closed the book firmly and faced Edmund directly. His voice was calm, yet sharp as a blade. "If you continue to deny it, everyone will know that you are not only arrogant, but also complicit in the crime of your own lineage." A chill ran through the room, and no one dared move. Edmund took a step back, and in that instant it became clear that he was no longer fighting just a boy's words, but the truth that was inevitably about to ruin him in front of everyone. Edmund could no longer bear the weight of the gazes boring into him like sharp knives. With each breath, he felt the air grow heavier, and the mask of power he had cultivated for years shattered before everyone's eyes. His hands trembled as he tried to adjust his jacket, but no gesture could hide the nervousness that gripped him. "You don't know what you're saying," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room, but without the force it once had. "This boy is making things up, manipulating symbols that even he doesn't understand." The words fell hollow, ineffective, like stones thrown into an abyss. Jonas, firm, remained silent for a few seconds, staring at Edmund with eyes that held not hatred, but conviction. Amara, in the background, could barely move, gripped by the fear that the millionaire's fury would turn against her son. Leonard, on the other hand, stepped forward, his posture erect and his voice firm as steel. "Enough denial, Edmund. You can scream all you want, but you can't erase the truth that's right in front of us." The entire room hung in suspense, as if everyone was waiting for the moment when the tension would explode. Edmund advanced toward the table, breathing heavily, his eyes flashing with anger. His entire body trembled, but he was driven by a mixture of wounded pride and uncontrollable fear. "That book is mine," he roared, slamming his hand down on the pages, as if physical contact were enough to restore him to control. Jonas didn't back away. On the contrary, he stood erect, facing the millionaire head-on, his small frame contrasting with Edmund's imposing figure, but his presence radiated a strength no one else in the room possessed. Leonard intervened, stepping between them and raising his hand, his deep voice commanding respect. "Don't touch him, Edmund. You've already lost your authority here." The millionaire laughed, but it was a bitter, forced laugh that betrayed his weakness. "Have I lost? I haven't. No one dares challenge me in my own home." With each word, his image became more pathetic, a man fighting against an unstoppable tide. The guests, motionless, witnessed the downfall of someone who until then seemed untouchable. It was then that Jonas opened the book again, with a calm gesture, and his voice cut through the air once more. The Guardian wrote that truth would come to light through the mouth of the improbable, and that the powerful would fall before simplicity. The hall trembled at the phrase, which sounded like a prophecy fulfilled right there and then. Leonard nodded, confirming that this was the accurate translation, and many guests raised their hands to their mouths, as if they had just witnessed something supernatural. Edmund, overcome with despair, grabbed the book tightly, trying to snatch it from Jonas's hands, but Leonard grabbed his arm, firmly restraining him. "It's no use, Edmund," he said, staring at him coldly. "The more you resist, the more you confirm your guilt." The millionaire yanked his arm back, his face distorted with rage, and shouted, "You don't know who you're dealing with." The echo of his voice was lost in the deathly silence that filled the room, until Jonas calmly looked up and said, "Then show us, Edmund. Show us who you really are." The challenge hung in the air, and everyone felt they were about to witness the ultimate downfall of the most powerful man in the room. Edmund Wycliffe's face was distorted with fury, his red skin contrasting with the sweat that ran down his forehead and neck. His eyes, once symbols of power and pride, now trembled like those of a cornered man, unable to bear the weight of the truth crushing down upon him. He raised his arms in a theatrical gesture, trying to regain the room's attention. "Enough. This farce ends now. None of you understand the greatness of my family, the legacy I carry, and certainly not a dirty, insolent boy who will rewrite our history before strangers." The words echoed, but they sounded hollow, fragile, as if the very acoustics of the hall refused to support them. The guests, once reverent, looked at him with a mixture of contempt and pity, as if witnessing the agony of a deposed king. Amara, her heart aching, instinctively approached her son, ready to defend him, even though she knew nothing could stop him if Edmund decided to take out his fury. Leonard, however, remained motionless, his posture firm as a wall, awaiting the millionaire's next move. Jonas, serene, opened the book again and let the words echo with an almost supernatural force. Here it is written that the Wycliffe fortune was born not of labor, but of blood. The Guardian warned that the weight of this truth would fall upon their descendants, until one day the unlikely voice would reveal all. The shock was immediate. A murmur of disbelief filled the hall, and many guests raised their hands in astonishment, as if in disbelief. Leonard confirmed, his voice thick with seriousness, "He's not making it up. It's all here. Edmund, your family built empires on the death of their own blood." The professor's words fell like hammer blows, and Edmund staggered, holding onto the table to keep from collapsing completely. "Lies. Damned lies," he shouted, but his tone was that of a defeated man, unable to convince even himself. Jonas, his eyes shining with determination, looked up and said, "It is not I who condemn, sir. It is your own story written in these pages." The silence that followed was piercing, every person in the room feeling the weight of the revelation like an invisible current. Edmund, breathing heavily, looked like a man about to collapse, and for the first time his ruthless figure was reduced to the fragile image of someone defeated by his own past. Amara, unable to hold back her tears, held her son's shoulder, proud and frightened by the grandeur of what he carried. Leonard looked at Edmund as if watching an empire crumble before his eyes, and at Jonas as if recognizing the birth of something extraordinary. "If this message is true," one of the guests murmured, "then everything we believed about the Wycliffes is nothing but a carefully guarded lie." The phrase echoed, and no one dared to dispute it. Edmund, livid, opened his mouth, but could not utter a word. Jonas slowly closed the book, raised his eyes, and stared at the millionaire firmly. "You can hide objects, you can buy silences, but you will never be able to bury the truth." The entire hall shook, and everyone felt that the outcome was near. waiting only for the last piece to fall so that the fall would be final. The hall was suspended in an almost sacred silence, as if everyone awaited the final blow that would seal this historic night. Edmund Wycliffe, panting, leaned against the table like a castaway struggling against invisible waves, his glassy eyes and hunched body betraying the defeat he tried to deny. Jonas, standing before the book, seemed illuminated by the very truth he held in his hands, the unlikely figure who had transformed mockery into authority, silence into revelation. Leonard Gray, beside him, remained motionless, watching as both witness and judge of all that had unfolded. Amara, tears streaming down her face, felt her heart beat with a mixture of fear and pride, seeing her son standing before powerful men, not as an invisible servant, but as the voice that had laid bare centuries of secrets. The heavy air in the hall was cut only by Edmund's nervous breathing, and every look fixed on him was like a sentence. Finally, in a fit of despair, the millionaire threw up his arms and shouted, "Everything he said is true." The confession came out as a stifled roar, and the hall erupted in stunned murmurs. The guests reacted in waves. Some stood in shock, others covered their mouths in disbelief, and many stared at Edmund with contempt, as if the confession were definitive proof of the fall of an empire. Leonard raised his voice, firm and solemn. "Then it is confirmed. The book does not lie. Your family built its fortune on treason and blood, and now everyone knows." Edmund, unable to bear his own image, collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands, his entire body trembling like that of a man destroyed not by external enemies, but by the weight of the truth. Jonas closed the book with a calm gesture, and the sound of the pages flapping was like the final seal of an irrevocable judgment. The boy, who had entered that room as simply the maid's son, now stood as the central figure of a revelation that would forever mark the memory of all present. Amara hugged him tightly, the tray falling to the floor without her caring, for nothing else mattered but holding her son in that moment. As Edmund remained hunched in silence, defeated by his own past, Leonard approached Jonas and placed his hand on his shoulder. "The world needs minds like yours, boy," he said in a deep voice. "Not men who hide truths, but those who have the courage to reveal them." The guests applauded, first timidly, then intensely, transforming the hall into an unexpected celebration. Jonas, without vanity, simply smiled slightly, his eyes still steady and serene, as if he knew what he had done was not about glory, but about justice. Amara, crying, kissed him on the forehead, grateful for having raised a son who, even in the silence of the night, had prepared himself for this moment. Edmund, motionless, was the image of pride in ruins, a man who had lost everything before that which he could never control, the truth. And so, that night, everyone understood that greatness lies not in wealth, but in the simple, unbreakable power of those who dare to say, "I can read." If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and share. This way, you'll help us bring you more moving stories that impact and transform lives. Thank you so much for your support.